The biggest misconception I've heard around AI adoption means it's like this huge, big, visible transformation that happens overnight. And I think in reality, successful adoption shows up in really small, targeted changes.
My guest today is Melissa Brancato, an Adobe Experience Platform champion and a technical leader in real-time personalization and AI-driven strategy. For nearly a decade, she's been helping teams turn complex data into systems that actually work, from AEP architecture to scalable journeys and workflows. But what makes this conversation different? It's the realization that the biggest barrier to AI adoption isn't the technology, it's the organization itself. In this episode, we talk about what happens when companies try to bolt AI onto org structures built for a completely different era. What breaks first? Why teams aren't actually set up to absorb AI? And what it really takes to redesign around it. We also get into the hard stuff, ownership, leadership, and what people have to give up to make this work. Because this isn't just about adopting AI. It's about whether your organization is built to use it at all. So let's get into it. This is Thinking with AI. Melissa, welcome to Thinking with AI.
So happy to be here.
Can I just say your hair looks amazing?
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I'm so excited to have you here and talk about org structure, AI adoption, and this topic is truly chef's kiss.
I can't wait. I can't wait to dive into it.
It's a hot topic. I've been thinking a lot about this, especially in enterprises and larger organizations where, we have a ton of sensitive data. And the more conversations I've had, I realize the bottleneck isn't the technology, it's the org itself, the structure,
Totally.
the decisions we make. And so that's why I'm super excited. I think this conversation is one that needs to happen. And to start, I would love to ask you, most adoption conversations focus on tools and training. When did you first realize the real bottleneck was actually org structure?
So that's a great question because I've been thinking a lot about how, what actually makes AI adoption work. And I think a lot of it comes down to trust, right? Like trust in the data, trust in the decision. But the more I dig in, especially through experience across my career, the more I realize there's a whole nother layer. Even when the data is ready, organizations still freeze. And I think, what I've experienced is that most AI conversations tend to focus on tools and training. But for me, that's not where things stalled. I think that just from being in different environments over time, I've seen, in one company, just even trying AI meant going through committees, approvals. It just required so much coordination. And I totally get it, right? There's a strong desire to manage risk and it could feel totally unpredictable. But what that culture created was constant hesitation. People weren't just thinking about how to use AI. They were wondering if they were even allowed to. So the tools were technically there. They just didn't feel usable and practical. I think it was hard to experiment, really hard to learn, and even more challenging to gain some kind of momentum. And then in my career, what I experienced was being in a much more AI native environment. And the difference was immediate. It wasn't just better tools. It was that AI just became a part of how work got done. People used it naturally. It became a verb when we talk about how have you done this? Have you used this? It became a way of working where we were learning as we went. We were building confidence really quickly, but we were still applying our own judgment where it mattered in the process. And I think that's where it started to click for me. It's the constraint wasn't capability. It was whether the organization created clarity and permission around using it. In that example, in my career, it's one environment slowed people down before they could even get started, while the other let their teams move while still being totally responsible.
And I love that you mentioned that AI became so natural as part of our day-to-day and our work. And I think that's going to become more and more evident. I think 2 years ago, we were talking about it oh my God, AI, this tool.
So
and now it's just,
exactly.
And now it just feels so natural. It's just, oh yeah, look at what I created, Claude gave me this example for you, right? And then
Absolutely.
before it's oh, like AI, what is it? Like this tool.
And
So
we were
you
even
mentioned
scared to say AI.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And now we're moving away from that fear. And I think
We,
you made a really good point about like organizations just being AI forward and accepting and try experimentation. Can you tell us more? How are you experimenting today? And what does that look like for you?
so thinking about like the way that I work today, I'll even just say like when I start my day and I log in, Claude is one of the tabs that I have open, or chat Copilot is integrated in all the tools that I use. So it's a part of the process. And what I started doing to get more familiar in how I integrate it in my workflow was thinking about like, okay, how do I make this process quicker? What can I try? What are the prompts that I've either seen on resources that I found or coworkers sharing like their success stories or even their challenges? Like even knowing where they were struggling to use AI made me a better practitioner in how I use it in my day to day. So it's like actively pulling in these tools to be a part of my process and just trying things that work and remembering and even noting down like, okay, that made it actually better, or maybe I needed more refinement. I can iterate on it. Or it's, storing down a log or sharing it in community, like, here's what I tried and it didn't totally work. Like, it wasn't quite what I was looking for. And how do I adjust my prompt? Or maybe the tool's not totally ready for this kind of capability. And I'm like just dreaming big at this point, but I know in the future it'll come. So experimenting became part of like just the process of working, like process of just trying to get to outcomes in production in a way that felt really intentional with the work that I was trying to accomplish that day. So experimentation folded into like the everyday process. It became like a partner in what I was trying to achieve.
No, I think it's really important to build a culture of experimentation in, across your team,
Yeah.
your org. It's very important. That's how we learn. That's how we get better. I guess I'm curious to hear because I mean, you've had such an impressive career, right, at AAA, and now you're at Merkle, and you're working with a lot of different customers. And I'm sure this topic of, again, AI adoption and just org design comes up a lot. So I'm curious, if you had to describe the org structure most companies are still running on today, how would you characterize it and how is it designed?
Dude. Yeah. And, I've been really lucky to work across many different kinds of environments over the course of my career, and especially with incredible clients that I have today. When I think about org structure and AI adoption, I think what I've seen is that most companies are still operating on this model where it was built around functional silos and sequential work. Like it was designed for a time where work had to be broken apart. One team handles analysis, another execute, another reviews, and everything moves step by step with very clear boundaries between the roles. So it's like, I think that structure made sense when information was harder to access and work really required dedicated specialization at each stage. But like now with AI, one person can move across multiple parts of that process. They can look at data, they can generate options, and they can act and execute and refine that all in one flow. What I found is that org structure that I'm talking about, where there's all these different pockets of silos, those structures haven't caught up to that reality of what AI can do and help accelerate. So like what you get then is too many boundaries, too many handoffs, and like just so much distance between insight, decision, and action. And like that's the gap. I think the org was still designed for a much slower, more segmented way of working, while the tools are built for something that's much more fluid.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I had to ask, right? Because most companies, at least in the enterprise space, aren't starting from scratch. They have to work with what they've got, and it's a complete like culture shift. And I think it's interesting that you make up or you talk about the step-by-step process because I do think the future worker, right? Like I'm a marketer. It my role is going to look completely different. I think I'm going to be leaning into so many different functions because
Yes.
of everything that's available. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see like the typical worker in tech, right? They're going to be very well versed in different areas of the business. It's not just going to be, hey, marketer, stick to your own kind of
Right.
lane. And so I think
Yes.
that's what's really, really interesting. And I think honestly, speed and taste combined is a new superpower. And I think
Yes.
it reminds me of what you're talking about with org design, right? In order to kind of see that new worker, your organization has to be ready for that.
I think there's a lot of evolution in how teams are trying to adapt AI into the work. Like that requires a willingness to rethink and redesign your current process and iterate it for the better. So it's been really interesting to experience that in my own career and like also observe it from afar, like the companies that I know that are a little bit more cautious and the companies that are, becoming more AI native in their day-to-day workflows.
Okay, I love that you mentioned that because there's a lot of tension when it comes to this idea of redesigning teams, redesigning orgs. And how do you think, or how do you redesign teams without becoming a layoff conversation, or is that tension unavoidable?
I think the tension's really, it's real, right? Like, and I think that also comes down to how the change is framed in those conversations. If AI is positioned in a way to cut costs or replace work, people naturally get this like protection mode. They get into survival state of mind and they get very, very nervous about what introducing AI actually means to their contribution. But when AI is framed in a way that the work itself is evolving, I think the conversation can shift pretty quickly. And I've seen it happen in multiple different ways. And I really appreciated how clarity and honesty can really build a lot of confidence. So like what I've seen to start work better is just beginning with a specific workflow and making this change really tangible. Like something like campaign creation, instead of spending hours drafting, revising, and coordinating across multiple teams and multiple departments and multiple processes, I think AI can take a lot of that first task. But in that example, your role doesn't go away, it shifts, right? Like it accelerates the output, but the focus becomes more about shaping the message or making decisions or even just thinking about the impact. Like you have more space to do that because a lot of that manual labor is handed off to the solution that gives you the ability to think about those kind of things. And I think with the tension, like that shift of an evolution in your role and your day-to-day work, that has to be experienced, not just explained from a conversation. I think once people can actually see how their work changes and where they as individuals still add value, it stops feeling like replacement and then starts feeling like a different level of contribution. It almost feels like an investment in your own professional growth, right? Like you're able to do things in a way that's expedited and thoughtful with using another tool in your tool set, but you're able to provide more value in things like strategy or things like direction and thinking about where you can start to have more impact in the industry. But like, I think that being said, the tension doesn't disappear. Anytime the nature of work changes this much, there's going to be some level of uncertainty. And the teams that are upfront about that are the ones that handle it really well and they make the path forward really clear. It's like, then don't just learn AI, but here's how your role evolves and here's where you have more impact. And like that combination of clarity, honesty, transparency, and even like just vision builds a lot more confidence than trying to soften or just avoid the conversation altogether.
Thank you. That was a great example. And I think you're spot on. I think trust is everything, right? I think you have to build the trust with your team and address the good and the bad. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. You mentioned also a couple of things in terms of like redesign. I'm curious, what's the smallest structural change you've seen that has had the biggest impact on how people are using AI?
Yeah, that's really interesting is that I've experienced it in so many different ways in how AI is introduced in work, especially in the last few years, right? It becomes not just a fun thing that you experiment with on the side to create fun images of you and your pet, but now it's like, okay, this is actually how we work and here's how we're going to get better at what we do and shape our craft. So small changes you can do today for AI adoption to take place in your organization is thinking about setting clear guidelines, like just practical guidelines for not having to run through this process of permission every single time someone wants to use AI. I think having those clear guidelines or those guardrails, it becomes a way for teams to understand what they can do and like what they can't do. So in more cautious environments, I think using AI can feel like something that needs to be justified, right? Like I need to explain why I want to use AI in this process or fold this into my workflow. Someone might draft something with it and then hesitate to share it, or they might just redo it manually because they're totally unsure of how that's going to be received, or they just avoid using it altogether because it's not explicitly approved for that exact scenario. So like when you can shift from thinking about AI integration on a case-to-case basis and instead saying, hey, this is where it's appropriate to use AI. Here's what still needs a human pass. Like, here's what to avoid. Like having those really clear distinctions just makes it much easier to experiment and also create confidence and just the usability of the tool. I think the second guessing drops, people will stop wondering if they're allowed to use it and then start to focus on actually how they use it well.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I know you talk to a lot of customers every single day. You're getting asked so many different questions when it comes to this idea of adoption and just redesigning, your org and rethinking your role. What are some questions that customers are coming to you with where they're just, whether it be like, again, about adoption, about redesign or anything? I'm just curious because you work across so many different industries, right? So you see it all. I'm just curious, like, what is top of mind for these practitioners?
Yeah, I think the question I get probably the most often is, are we allowed to do this? And also, is it safe, right? There's like this idea of anytime you pull in new tools, there's a level of risk in anything that you do. So I think they're appropriately trying to gauge the level of risk using AI in their operations, say, introduces, and they're trying to manage that. So like that's the question I hear is like, is it safe? What does it mean for my data? Is it also going to replace my job, right? Like I definitely hear those comments of like, oh, another AI tool was just published on the industry. Like I saw this headline on LinkedIn and it's like, what does that mean for me? And like, what do I need to do to get better at leveraging it? Like, I don't even know how to use it. Where do I start? Where do I even learn information, right? There's just so much coming out at once. I think everyone's just paralyzed how to get started with having those questions in mind.
What are some tips that you give those people or those, practitioners, those customers that are asking, how do I get started? Where should I find this information? Like, where do you point them to?
I think there's a lot of great resources that are coming out now. One of them is Adobe's the AI Learning Hub that was just published the other day. So amazing to see and like to be able to have ways to improve your skill set, right? Like I think there's a lot of conversations around prompt engineers and prompt engineering to make sure, the questions that you're asking an agent is actually providing you output that's meaningful. So in terms of like getting information, there's a lot of great resources out there. I think I personally subscribe to a lot of incredible newsletters that share, headlines on upcoming news, things that are new solutions, and also real use cases by actual people. I think that's really helpful. I think it's one thing to read about how AI is changing the industry or checking things out. But if you actually get real practical applications of not just successes, I'm really big on, socialize your success, but also socialize your challenges. Once you have that, you're more equipped to move more confidently because you're using learned experiences to apply in your day-to-day. So like, there's a lot of information out there, knowing what resources to start with, and then think about how you can redefine your own processes with the introduction of these new AI tools with those insights.
Yeah, I love that. I think that, and honestly, I don't know if you've seen like this whole, I don't know if it's necessarily a debate, but just the new it word for AI and tech is taste, right? And so yeah, have you heard that?
No.
Oh, really? Yeah. So it's to me, it's, when I hear this word, oh, like high taste, right? It just really means like good judgment.
Okay.
Good. Yeah, like having
Yes.
really good judgment to be able, to your point, right? Asking the agents the right question. Like you can't buy taste or like the
Hmm.
eye if you have it. And it's like the
Yes.
same thing when you're using these tools, right? Like the more you tinker and the more you
Yes.
use them, the better you get and you start developing like good judgment, right? And you
Yeah.
start understanding how not even just to prompt, but to think of not the step by step, but the entire workflow. And it just becomes such a natural part of your work where you're just like not even thinking of it as AI. So
Yeah.
lots of really good tips. I love it. I really want to ask you a couple more questions. I want to get into ownership for a minute because I think it's really important and not enough people are really talking about this. So, based on what you've seen and the conversations you're having with different customers, what do you think a leader has to personally give up to actually redesign around like AI capabilities rather than protecting their like existing structure?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I've been lucky in my career to have an experience leadership in my own journey, and that has me reflecting a lot of my own leadership journey, and not just for myself, but also the leaders that I observed and admired in the workplace. And I think a big part of evolution is letting go, like letting go being the point where everything comes together. And in a lot of organizations that I've seen, like leaders are so used to being so deeply involved in the day to day. I've even experienced this where like information flows up to me and decisions get shaped at this higher level, and then things move forward for the team. There's that clarity that happens in those conversations. And I think, that's where leaders have built a lot of their value, is by having the most context and then staying really closely connected to the work as it progresses. With the introduction of AI and new tools, I think teams have access to then more information. Leaders just don't need to have that same level of involvement to keep things moving. They can, the teams can now gather context, they can explore options and make progress all on their own. So, in that idea of letting go being the center of everything, I think the shift then for leaders becomes about, you know, more intentional about where you step in. It's not just about being involved in every step, but it's like, where does your input actually change the outcome and where might it actually slow things down? Um, like thinking about leadership and again, reflecting on my own journey, I think there's a big identity piece to it. Like if you're
Mm.
so used to contributing by reviewing, by shaping, by guiding work along the way, it can feel very uncomfortable to take a step back from that. But I do think if you do, and you do have this intention of just taking a step back to observe and let go, it really creates space for your teams to move faster and take more
Mm.
ownership. And now the leaders can focus more on direction, priorities, and like the moments that really matter, right, around professional development of your team. And then going back to taste, they can develop their own sense of taste and judgment to figure out where they need to make certain decisions in certain calls and where to have certain review points in their process. So in thinking about letting go again, it's not just stepping away. It's about redefining where you're the most valuable in the work.
Nice. I love that. And yeah, it's a different time for sure. And I think it's also like a willingness like problem, right?
Yeah.
You have to be willing to adapt and change because it's not just the practitioner role that's changing, it's also this idea of like leadership and middle management, right? Like what is that going
Yes.
to look like? We all have to kind of change and evolve the evolution, right? Together. I want to dig deep into, again, you are probably like in the hot seat right now. You're just having so many interesting conversations with so many different customers. So I really want to understand, based on your conversations, have you seen a company actually get this right? What made it possible and what did it cost them? Kind of walk, if you can walk us through just like an example of good or design, good like AI adoption, that would be great.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's like I've seen parts of AI adoption done really well, but not usually across an entire company all at once. I think it happens within, specific teams or workflows. It's not just about like adopting AI. I think going back to your statement earlier, it's like this willingness to rethink how the work actually happens. And you need to have a outcome tied to that. So like the teams that are using it really well are all in understanding this end-to-end flow of a problem they're trying to solve. So in an example, like thinking about customer feedback, you're taking in all this customer feedback, all this data, and you're creating insights off of this. What you're trying to solve for is maybe retention, right? Like retention of your customer base and how you market to them or how you create touch points. The teams that have been really successful with AI adoption fold it in naturally into their flow and think about how they're going to get work done. If this can be like, it's thinking about like, if this can be done in minutes, what should this look like instead with leveraging AI? And those are happening specifically in teams that own the solution to that problem or own the solution to understanding how those, those metrics and those narratives tie into customer sentiment on your brand. So AI there is helping take all this data that you're getting from customer feedback, whether it's surveys or actually quantitative data through analytics, and gathering those inputs and patterns based on this problem that we're trying to solve and generate a starting point for this team. So like the team that stays really close to it, end-to-end shaping and acting are the ones that are really successful. I think it starts to kind of, spread and distribute across the company at that point. Like once you start seeing a team have this crazy, level of excitement and energy around what they're doing, like it increases not just the output at the end of what you're trying to solve, but also like the team morale. And you see the teams rallying together and coming together on this. You're kind of like, oh, what's happening there? And it starts to spread organically across the organization where you're not just being told to think about AI, you're told, here's a tool, like, here's how it's going to help you figure out how to use it and then share that out with your community. And I think that's what makes companies really successful. And they don't try to get it perfect up front either. I think there's a lot of room to iterate and experiment and adjust, and figuring out what actually works creates momentum instead of hesitation.
That was such a good answer. Oh my God. Okay, moving on to my favorite part of the show. One thing that you probably know this about me because of the nature of how we met, but one thing that's really important to me with this podcast is bringing the community into the conversation. So we asked practitioners who are actually living this, right, like inside their orgs, to submit questions, and we got some really great ones. Are you ready?
I'm ready. So excited to hear from the people.
I know. I love this part of the podcast. Okay. First question is from Dan Bowman, part of the data integrations team at AAA. Do you know Dan?
I know that Dan is incredible. He's absolutely brilliant. And I was so excited to see his question come in on the community thread.
Yay. Hey, Dan. Okay. So his question is,
hi, my name is Dan Bowman. I'm part of the data integrations team at AAA Northeast. My question is, for legacy companies that have been operating the same way for years, what does successful AI adoption realistically look like, and how can they introduce new AI practices without disrupting existing processes, culture, or trust?
It's a great question. And, thinking about legacy companies, I think the biggest misconception I've heard around AI adoption means it's like this huge, big, visible transformation that happens overnight. And I think in reality, successful adoption shows up in really small targeted changes in how work actually gets done. It's not a full reset. It's not like integrate AI and then your lives are changed forever tomorrow. It's not, we're an AI company now. It's more like quietly improving the moments where teams are already feeling friction. Like, how do we break down these processes where work is super manual and super intensive, but AI can help expedite or move things along in a lot more of a seamless process. So going back to the idea of processes, it's like, instead of ripping out existing processes, I think you need to start asking, where is the work slowing down? Where are decisions getting stuck? And then where are people relying on gut because the system isn't helping? And I think that's where AI earns its place. The key to all of this is like, don't just introduce AI as something separate, embed it into the way people work, into the workflows that people already trust. Same tools, same ownership, same accountability, just better support within those moments. And I think the other part is thinking about structure. And the thing that's really great about legacy organizations is they have this incredible muscle memory. And when thinking about adoption, I think that's an advantage if you use it right? Like they have all this history, all this experience of trying to figure things out to have that legacy to be the company that they are today. And the companies that succeed in AI adoption, they don't fight that structure, they actually clarify it within it. They start to define who owns what, how decisions get made, and where AI is allowed to influence versus where humans or the teams firmly stay in control. And I think that's what protects trust in this whole process. Disruption usually doesn't come from technology itself. I think that kind of culture happens when people don't know how something is being used, or whether, it's replacing, going back to that tension conversation, or who's accountable when something goes wrong. I think that's when resistance starts to kick in these larger environments. So thinking about approach, start with lowering the temperature. Make AI feel really practical, contained, and useful. You want it to show value in ways that is easy to understand and hard to argue with, right? Just like data. And then you start to expand from there once you have all that experience locked in. I think with all these small incremental changes, over time, adoption compounds. And like what starts as one small improvement to how work gets done becomes a more connected, intelligent system. But it's not like a shock to the whole organization. It just already feels like the progress they were part of shaping.
Yeah, no, that was a great answer. And honestly, great question, Dan. The second question is from Narendra Gandhi. I apologize if I mispronounced the name. Architect at Publicis Sapient. As we see the rapid emergence of AI agents capable of supporting complex project tasks, how might we define a staff augmentation model where humans and AI agents work together effectively? In that context, how should we think about human-in-the-loop governance for an Adobe Experience Platform implementation?
That's a great question. Thank you for adding that in. Yeah.
The community's killing it.
Showing up with the card-hitting questions. That's awesome.
Yay.
Let's see. So like, I think the easiest way to think about this is that AI agents look less like tools and actually become more the team. They become part of the team. And the question, isn't just what can AI do? It's how do we divide the work so it actually flows better? So again, going back to process efficiency. And I think what I've seen done really well is letting AI handle all of that heavy lifting. So like pulling data together, spotting patterns, surfacing insights, generating a first pass in an audience or journey, which is awesome. And you have these awesome interfaces to be able to do that. All of that stuff really slows people down at the start. Like, how do you get started? Now you have a conversational agent to help you brainstorm and have a starting point to go off of. And then with that introduction of AI, it's, the human stays focused on the parts that actually require judgment or case. And, it's what are we trying to do? Does this make sense for the business? Should we act on it? How does this need to be shaped before it actually goes live? And instead of bouncing between teams, it becomes much more of that loop. You're working with AI to move something forward instead of handing it off step by step. And then when you bring something like that into AEP, it shows up really quickly, right? Like there's all these incredible capabilities that are part of the process of orchestration. And, AI can now suggest audiences, surface those insights, provide, really clear paths to documentation and the incredible knowledge base to help you on your journey to understand what you're doing step by step. But, there's still a human that needs to decide, is this the right audience? Does this align with what we're trying to achieve? And are we comfortable activating this? So, like, all that business context that you have. And I think going back to the original question, it's like, that's where the human in the loop piece comes in. And I think this is where a lot of teams also overcorrect, because if everything needs a human review, you lose all that speed that you just gained. But if nothing does, like if nothing has a review, then you introduce like massive amount of risk, right? Like I think there's got to be a checkpoint in that process. So being really clear where human review actually matters is very important. Anything high impact or external maybe gets a human pass. Lower risk things like internal analysis or early drafts can move a lot faster then. And instead of reviewing everything at every single step, you define a few of those key checkpoints where it actually counts. So at the end of the day, it's less about controlling AI and more about being intentional about where the human comes in and like changes the outcome of what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. And I love that you touched on that, because I do think, and I think this question is amazing, because human in the loop is it's critical. At least we're still in that time now. I mean, you have, right, like a lot of creators and a lot of different people creating using only relying on AI to like create like AI generated like human videos, right? But at the end of the which is, a little, I respect it, but it's a little scary sometimes.
Yeah.
But even with that, right? I think the amount of editing and what you get as a first output, there's still a human, right?
Yes.
Going in there. Exactly.
You still have to refine it, right?
Exactly. And it's your first output is never going to be perfect. So I think it's so critical to learn and make the decision of when that human comes in, right? Because again, you can't buy taste. This is something that is just such a human being trait, right? And I'm not saying like AI does not have taste, like, but I do think maybe it will next year. Who knows?
What we're talking about in 2027, right?
Exactly. Okay, cool. Well, before I get into our rapid fire, I wanted to ask you just kind of a fun question on what has been the most exciting to you, and it doesn't have to be like work related, but what is exciting you for the rest of this year? And also, is there anything just new and unique that you've encountered recently in this world of like agentic?
Yes. Okay. So two-part question. Let's see if I can cover it all. So in terms of what I'm excited about for this year, I think there's just so much development happening right now, right? Like all this technology advances is happening a lot quicker than ever before. Like I look back and I hear these stories about how long the internet took to be something that becomes second nature, like, being able to access information so readily on your phone. AI adoption is happening, like AI agents and introduction of all these different tools and skills and ways of working is happening a lot faster. So I'm excited about the opportunity to learn more and, figure out how I can improve my own skill set and figure out where I can have the most impact by leveraging these tools to make better work. And in that, I've even found ways to make AI a part of my own personal life. I'm a big fan of experimenting. Yeah, not just in work. I think work is really impactful, but I love being able to see the possibilities, right? Because like AI, you figure out as you experiment. And one of the things, I'm a really big person on organizing, and I love a spreadsheet. I love a database. And what I've done, I'll give a very specific example.
I love
is
it.
I love collecting fragrances. Like I recently got into that this year or last year. Yeah. And I don't know what I like. Like I was just like, this smells good. let me buy it and let me add it to my collection. So at a certain point, I probably approved over 30 fragrances from friends. Like I have really really great
Wow.
people around me. Yeah, like a community is like, let's just trade like fragrances. Like it's another accessory of getting ready. Um, I use AI to help me create a database in Notion that had listed all the top, middle, and base notes. Give
Oh
like
my God.
I know, and like give
Wow.
all this data to enhance what I was learning about myself and my own taste in the world of fragrances and what I really liked. And then like also inputting what I didn't like, and that it turned into using AI to say, hey, look at this database that you helped me create, and also suggest a layering fragrance recipe for the day. Like I would feed it the weather. I would feed it like, what the vibe was of the day, like what kind of day I was having in terms of meeting, or even like my outfits. Like if I was going for like a specific look, I would say, hey, this is what I'm doing today. Look at my database. What would you suggest I wear? And it would give me like this playbook for the day around fragrances.
Wow, Melissa, that is amazing. Honestly, very unique and creative. I have not heard that one yet. It's so fun.
How
I
about
love that
you?
I, so one example that comes to mind actually is I'm looking to expand hobbies. So living in New York City, besides being a foodie, right? Like what else is there to do? No, I'm kidding. But I've been looking into, so I've always loved like fashion and design. And so just looking into, there's a lot of really amazing courses here because it's fashion capital. It's I think it's Parsons School of Design, yes. And they are teaching a course on sketching, and the course is really
Wow.
interesting because it's sketching, but it's utilizing AI for inspirational like wardrobe. And so the whole class, it's 3 months, so a quarter. And by the end of it, you're gonna have like a living like artifact of clothing,
So
and you're doing
cool.
sketching and AI for like at the same time, right? For inspiration to create that. So that's something really interesting
That's
and unique. I'm like,
awesome.
if I could use AI and also like sketch it out and actually create like a jacket, for example, or a dress, like that would be so amazing. And I have not
That's so
seen,
cool.
yeah, it's really cool. So it's interesting because it's like disrupting so many different industries, not just like tech, like this is like the
Yeah.
fashion industry. So really interesting course. Okay, let's move on to our rapid fire. So our rapid fire also, community is my favorite, but rapid fire is probably second. Quick questions and quick answers, whatever comes to mind first.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, first question. Biggest structural blocker to AI adoption? Hierarchy, culture, or incentives? Pick one.
Culture.
Okay. Second one. First thing you'd restructure in an AI ready org? Decision rates, team size, or reporting lines? Pick one.
Gosh. Team size.
Okay, wow, you're fast. That's good. Okay. Last one. The leader most likely to get reorg design right. The CEO, the chief human resources officer, or someone no one's heard of yet. Pick one.
What interesting. See, I have faith in all these. Okay, now I'm giving a long answer because I was like, I have faith in all these positions, but I think there's space for something new that we don't know yet.
I love that. Okay, Melissa, this was exactly the conversation I was hoping for. Thank you for being honest and answering all the questions. I think this topic deserves, a lot of love. It's interesting and really appreciate the time. How can people find you or follow what you're working on?
I would say follow me on communities. I'm there. I'm active. I'm looking at all the questions that come through. Let's interact there. I'm also on LinkedIn, so you can find me by my name and let's connect and chat.
Yay! Thank you so much. This was so fun.
Thank you for having me.
And to everyone listening, remember, AI isn't the hard part. You already knew that. The hard part is being honest about whether your organization is actually designed to use it. And that's the question worth sitting with. Thank you for joining us for Thinking with AI. We'll see you next time.